Thank you for coming to this event. As a North Shore resident, I'm particularly grateful for the opportunity for the Metropolitan Crime Commission to do this type of work in the parish that I live in. The Crime Commission was created in 1952 in recognition that crime and corruption are disincentives to growth. And the name of the Crime Commission, Metropolitan Crime Commission, was purposely chosen in the 1950s because it was never intended that this organization would strictly be an Orleans Parish-centric organization. So we didn't use the word New Orleans in our name. Even though our office and a lot of our history is in New Orleans, it was always intended that we would be a presence throughout the region, including the North Shore. So we're seeing it play out in the media. Some of the historical problems that have plagued Louisiana with respect to corruption and wrongdoing. We're having a notable event for the North Shore as we speak right now with a former DA being sentenced this morning in connection with corruption. But the other side of what the Metropolitan Crime Commission does is that we evaluate the performance of the criminal justice system. And we started doing this about 20 years ago. Initially, the business community came to us in New Orleans and asked if there was some metrics to determine judicial performance. And we did some homework and discovered that there are some universally accepted metrics for performance. And we found those metrics within the National Center of State Courts and began to apply those to the judiciary in New Orleans. After Katrina, the business community came back to us and said, listen, you've been elevating the public's knowledge of the operations of the judiciary and the court. What can you do about the police department and district attorney's office? Because after Katrina, the police department and district attorney's office were in total disarray. They were more inclined to communicate via dueling press conferences than they were working together. So we began to do some research and determined that there needed to be a shared metric. I'll get into that a little bit later. But that's the history of what we've been doing in New Orleans. So in 2015, we were approached by the North Shore business community and asked if we could begin to apply some of the analysis and promote some of the public's knowledge about the performance of the criminal justice system to the residents of St. Tammany Parish. So we launched this initiative in the summer of 2015, ground zero. So here we are, early April 2017, and I apologize it took so long, but the information wasn't readily available, and it took us some time to lay this foundation to make this report possible. So at everyone's seat, there are two reports. I'm here today to talk about the one talking about arrests and felony case outcomes. This is police and prosecutors. Last November, we issued a report on the court, and we have the performance of the judiciary, not comparing St. Tammany judges with judges in other jurisdictions, but the judges at that court were their peers on the court. And we've used the metrics in that that the National Organization for State Courts has recommended. So you have these reports. We're going to go through a PowerPoint. I hope that everyone has a clear sign of vision with this. But let's begin the slides. So, all right. So what we're tracking today is the process that criminal investigations intake and feed through and process through the criminal justice system. So it starts with arrest. So in your report, in Exhibit 1, you have the stats about all of the arrests. So the police make the arrests. The arrest categories are felonies, misdemeanors, traffic, and others. Once the arrest is made, a police report is generated to the district attorney's office. The district attorney's office then reviews the report to determine if there is sufficient evidence to justify a prosecution. So they're reviewing that report. The police are using the probable cause standard. Prosecutors applying the proof beyond a reasonable doubt standard, which is a standard to obtain a conviction for a criminal offense. So the district attorney's office, in reviewing that report, can either accept the charges, refuse the charges, or place an offender on a diversion program, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. Once the cases are accepted, they move over to the courts for disposition, and you have the prosecution, and then you have the possible outcomes: guilty plea, trial verdict, or dismissal. So this report focuses on a common metric between police and prosecutors, because historically police use uniform crime reports, which are reported crimes, as a report card. Now, UCRs, or reported crimes, something created by the FBI in the 1930s to track crime trends. They've evolved into the report card for police departments. And while that's a meaningful tool, it doesn't necessarily present an accurate picture. In the 1930s, when UCRs were created by the FBI, they did not include narcotics or drug offenses in there. So the reported crime events that are measured are going to be the thefts, the property crimes, the crimes of violence, and the weapons offenses, but not drugs, and that's going to be a third of any of the criminal activity in any parish. DAs, conversely, will measure their success by their conviction rate, and they won't necessarily go into explaining to the public how many cases they declined for prosecution, and they will not inform the public whether the prosecution started out as a felony and was resolved as a misdemeanor. So you have these different silo metrics involving police and prosecutors, which is really an impediment and doesn't provide a clear picture about the true performance of the system, also doesn't promote the cooperation, coordination that is necessary between police and prosecutors. So we've settled on utilizing a metric that will track the rest coming through the process. We will focus on the felonies, and then we'll determine the outcome of those felony cases. So by measuring arrest to conviction for felonies, you get a clearer picture of how effective and how coordinated the efforts of police and prosecutors are. So let's go to the next slide. So I created this slide. This isn't in your report, but we wanted to demonstrate how different St. Tammany Parish is than from New Orleans. Everyone over here intuitively knows that, but the important thing, another important part about this slide is we did this 2007. This is when we started the evaluation of police and prosecutors. And the years that we selected for St. Tammany Parish was 13 and 14. Well, why did we do that? Well, we had, a new district attorney being elected. So we needed to benchmark what the performance was of the system under the prior administration. And we selected 13 and 14 because we need to determine, and we wanted to determine, what the outcomes of those arrests are. So it generally takes a year or longer. So we took 2 years worth of felony arrests and tracked them through the process. So the arrests that were made in 14, we stopped determining the outcomes of these in June of 2016. So even with that, there were still about 6% of the cases open, but we had to give those cases time to move through the system so we could determine the outcomes of those arrests. But what you see here is, very contrasting between New Orleans and Jefferson. So the percentage of arrests for felony offenses, only 14% of the arrests that were made in New Orleans were for felonies, 26% in St. Tammany Parish. That's an indication that law enforcement is focusing their resources on the most serious offenses. Was not so in New Orleans. Felony case acceptance rates. When we started this in 2007, 61% acceptance rate, meaning 39% of the cases were declined for prosecution because there was insufficient evidence. So that meant the police made the arrests, 39% of the time those cases were declined. So the police arrested them, prosecutors declined them, so there begins to be resentment between police and prosecutors, and then the public, they see the offenders that had been arrested being released without being convicted of anything, and they begin to lose confidence in the system, and that erodes their cooperation in future cases. In St. Tammany Parish, 96% acceptance rate. The felony arrest to felony conviction rate, which is the ultimate metric that we're following, only 24% of the felonies resulted in a felony conviction. When we started this process under the district attorney, Leon Canizaro's office, that number in about 10 years is almost doubled to 44%. Instead of 61% of the cases being accepted, it's at 88%. So the overall conviction rate for 2013 and 14 was 63%. The national average is 54%. So what I'm going to be talking about are the recommendations that we're making in here. This number, this acceptance rate here of 96% and that conviction rate of 63%, you might actually be able to improve public safety in the parish by lowering those two numbers, and I'll go into that with this. But you can see very different between New Orleans and Jefferson, but where New Orleans started and where they are today is light years from that. St. Tammany Parish, when we went in and did this analysis of New Orleans, the criminal justice system was in the same condition as the levees were after Katrina. They were totally broken. St. Tammany Parish, that's not the case. St. Tammany Parish, the car is moving down the highway. If you put a little bit more air in the tire, it'll get from point A to point B a little bit quicker and save you a little gas. So St. Tammany Parish needs a little bit more air in the tires. Let's go next. So these are the crime trends in St. Tammany. This is reported crime, the UCRs that I told you about. This is sort of the Bible that most people look to determine what the crime rates are in any community. And this is an important tool, but doesn't provide the clear picture. So this doesn't mean UCRs, doesn't mean an arrest was made. This just means someone called in a crime that was determined to fit into these categories. So you can see that, violent crime in St. Tammany Parish, which is, the top slide here, is much, much lower than throughout Louisiana and nationally. Good problem to have. This DA from Leon Canizaro would probably trade, his left arm for these problems. Property crime in St. Tammany Parish, lower than in Louisiana and lower than the national rate. All positive signs. The question is, how are we processing these felonies once an arrest is made? So the overall trend in St. Tammany It's good, and it's trending in the right direction. So let's go to the next slide and take a look, and these are the actual numbers of felony arrests in St. Tammany, and all of this is going to be in the report that's at your table on the various charts. So you can see in 2013 and 2014, almost the same number of felony arrests. You can see the percentages are essentially the same. About a third of all of the arrests are for drugs, another third for property, weapons only 4%, and violence only 16%. So, the important thing that'll tie into some of the recommendations is with drugs. So you can see that about 75% of the drug arrests are for simple possession, meaning the other 25% are going to be for either distribution or possession with intent to distribute. So this is going to be the lower level drug possession charges that we're talking about that are generally probatable. So you can see these are the actual numbers in St. Tammany Parish. We'll be collecting these numbers every year and updating the community on the trends that are going on. Let's go to the next slide. So this is the St. Tammany Parish outcomes. So this is included in your report. And you can see of the cases that were initiated by the district attorney's office, this is the distribution. About 6% were still open as of June of last year. So even after a couple of years, a small percentage of cases remain open. And part of that is because some of the defendants maybe went at large and they were rearrested and brought back into the system, and that will account for a lot of the open cases that we see there. So you can see very low dismissal rate, only about 8%. Negligible amount of not guilties, a total of 15 over a 2-year period of time. Diversion, now we're going to be talking about that in the recommendation. So over a 2-year period of time, there was only about 144 felony offenders placed in a diversion program. And the other 16% of the felonies were resolved as misdemeanors. And then this is the felony conviction rate. So what we said is the measure for success is the police are investing the lion's share of their resources in responding to the most serious crime and investigating the serious crime. So a felony arrest that is declined for prosecution, sometimes despite the best efforts of the investigating agency, there's probable cause, but there is not proof beyond a reasonable doubt. But one of the things that we found in New Orleans was that when cases were declined from the district attorney's office, the police department wasn't given feedback as to why the cases were declined. So by not giving that feedback back to the officers, it does two things. It creates dissension and distrust between police and prosecutors. And if the officer did something incomplete, they're not getting corrected, they're not being explained the reasons or what was lacking in their investigation. So that feedback from prosecutors, even on the refusals, is essential. But even given that, you're looking at a 63% felony arrest to felony conviction ratio. The national average is 54%. As I pointed out, in New Orleans, it was in the mid-20s, and it has risen to about 45% in about 10 years. But St. Tammany Parish is already starting out well above the national felony arrest to felony conviction rate. Let's go to the next slide. So getting into the recommendations part of what we're talking about. So these are not major issues. This is about tweaking the system to improve the overall benefits for the people of the parish, save money, allow for the criminal justice system to be more effective and more efficient. So one of the first things that we noticed in taking a look at this information was that from the time that an arrest is made to the time that a prosecutor made a decision to prosecute, which is called the screening process, it was taking a total of an average of about 50 days. So we were able to break it down by the amount of time it took for the police to get the reports to the DA's office, which averaged about 29 days, and then the time that it took the DA's office to decide to prosecute. Now keep in mind, this is going to be in 2013 and 2014 under the prior administration. So what was happening in the district attorney's office during that period of time was there was essentially one screener, one person reviewing all of the arrest reports, and they were accepting 96% of the cases. That screener was a retired ADA that was working 20 hours a week doing that. That is not the best way to screen those cases. The question becomes, why was it taking 28 days to get a police report into the district attorney's office? Now, keep in mind that, most police departments' rules are that reports be written within a day or two of an arrest. So if it's taken 28, 29 days, a lot of those delays are going to be because of crime lab. So if we can start to identify the cause for some of those delays, and the officials can remove some of those delays, it'll move these cases through the system. So a prosecution cannot begin until a case is accepted. It's taking 50 days before someone that's been arrested that is not going to be prosecuted to be released from custody. So they're sitting behind bars. That's costing the parish money. That's contributing to jail overcrowding. And it's not an efficient utilization of resources. So the benefit of pointing this out is to encourage greater coordination and cooperation between police and prosecutors. I told you in the beginning that we started this and we announced this in June of 2015. About a week after we started it, I got a phone call from the sheriff, Jack Strain, saying that he'd been the sheriff for the better part of 20 years, and the communication level between the sheriff's office and the district attorney's office had risen to a level that he had never experienced before during his tenure. So the benefits of doing this, the real benefit of doing this is for law enforcement now to recognize that, collectively, they look better individually if they work with each other on this. And as fundamental and basic as that is, unfortunately, that has not always been the case in law enforcement and in criminal justice. So the solutions to this problem are really going to be with, Randy Smith and with Warren Montgomery. And I can assure you, based on my conversations with them, they've been on this since they took office. So this is a tweak to the system that can be applied and will save the parish money, allowing for prosecutors to handle their workload, making sure that the crime labs that are presenting a lot of the forensic evidence and any other impediments to getting these reports on a timely manner are removed, identified, and fixed. So that's recommendation 1. Recommendation 2. So St. Tammany Parish has been at the forefront of treatment-based solutions to crime. You have the drug courts, the reentry courts, the behavioral health courts. That's on the back end. You have the Covington Police Department's Operation Angel, which is a program that basically allows people with drug addiction problems to go to the police, any law enforcement agency in the parish, surrender their drugs, and ask for help. And they'll be placed into a treatment facility as opposed to being arrested and prosecuted. The idea is that if you can offer assistance to people that are using drugs, that is more than just being humane. It's about being smart on crime, because it's a crime reduction initiative. because the people that are involved in the drug culture, that are addicts, are the people that are most likely to be committing crime in this parish or any other jurisdiction. So that's something that this parish can be proud of. It's a crime reduction initiative. And then you have, as Scott alluded to in his opening comments, you have the St. Tammany Parish Safe Haven Project. So a couple of years ago, under the former governor, because of budgetary cuts, the state defunded a lot of the mental health programs. And a lot of those people that were receiving medication to help with their mental issues are no longer receiving it, which means that they act out, and when they act out in a way that's a violation of the law, the police department gets called, and the police department is now handling mental health issues because the state has essentially defunded the proactive programs that dealt with the mental health. St. Tammany Parish has recognized that, and they're actually providing resources in recognition that that is a crime reduction initiative for the parish too. Not just about saving money, but saving people from being victimized, and some of them with some tragic outcomes. So with all of that, one of the recommendations that we're making is that there be increased access to diversion for nonviolent first offenders. So in St. Tammany Parish, most of the crime in this parish is going to be drug possession and felony theft. And many of those offenders are going to be first-time offenders. And by providing access to diversion, it will reduce recidivism and crime in the parish. So when we issued, and I showed you that slide showing there were only about 144 people on diversion in 13 and 14. The diversion program under Walter Reed had about 1,000 slots in it, but only 144 of them were felons. So the people that are most likely to commit a felony are the people that have already committed a felony. So by providing some of the treatment to those people, diverting them from a prosecution, moving the nonviolent first offenders into that program, it will ostensibly reduce their recidivism and reduce crime going forward. Now, one of the problems with limited access is that the parish didn't fund a diversion program for the DA's office. So the DA's office had to assess the cost of the treatment and the counseling to the offenders. Many of the offenders are indigent. They're represented by the public defender's office. And those people, because they didn't have the money to pay for their counseling, were declined and prosecuted, and most of them received a felony conviction. So one of the problems with a felony conviction is that it limits employability. So if you can provide assistance to some of the eligible nonviolent offenders, it will allow more access into that, which will free up the police department and law enforcement agencies from having to respond to future crime that may have been prevented by helping some of those people. Will also tend to reduce the population or the active caseloads in the sections of court, allowing for prosecutors, defense attorneys, and the judges to process the most serious felonies in a more effective and efficient manner. So, what we're talking about here, 660 felony thefts arrests over a two-year period of time that were accepted, and another 1,000 or so drug possession charges. That's, almost 1,700 eligible felony offenders, and there were 144 people in that program. That is not a strategic use of those resources. If you reduce the conviction rate by moving the nonviolent offenders, bring it down a little bit by diverting some of these eligible offenders, you may actually be reducing crime in the parish and not compromising any of the work of the police or the district attorney's staff.